Well, hello again, and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Rusten. I'm one of the pastors at Deo Church, and I'm here with Pastor Jon. What's up, Pastor Jon?
Hey, it's good. It's Monday.
It is Monday.
It's October. Christmas traditions are starting, so it's good.
I will say that, so Christmas traditions, but do you have any fall traditions? Do you have fall traditions too?
No, the Christmas traditions spill into the fall.
Okay, got it. Sure, I get it. One of my traditions at this time of year is we start doing the wood stove. So the fire's going, the house is warm. It's so nice.
Oh, man. I woke up this morning early and went outside, and I could smell somebody's fireplace going. I was like, that's such a good smell.
It was windy today, and the smoke I could smell from the chimney outside as I kind of go in between my office and here. And I was like, this is fall. This is fall.
Yeah.
The trees are shedding leaves, and there's smoke in the air, and it's a little crisp. It was a little more sunny than it is now. It's kind of overcast, but
yeah.
So we are actually back in Exodus. I think where we left off was Exodus 24. So we're looking at Exodus 25 now. And Exodus 24, it's kind of interesting when you look at Exodus, like the timeline is kind of hard to discern because you have like some narrative, and then you have these breaks where there's like the instruction is given, but it's like that instruction isn't part of the narrative. It's actually happening at that point in the narrative, right? And that could be for chapters. And then you pick up the narrative like chapters later, and you kind of forget where you are in the story. So Exodus 24 is the last bit of narrative. And interestingly, it ends with Moses going up on top of the mountain for 40 days. And chapter 25 begins the explicit instruction given to Moses on the mountain, right? Yeah. And this is his second or third instruction given on the mountain, because he's given the law first, and then it comes down. Yep. And they all agree to the law, and they get consecrated to the law, right? Or consecrated to the covenant, right? That covenant gets ratified in 24. And now Moses goes away again. And he's going away now because he's going to be told how to make this Sinai reality mobile, right? With the tabernacle. And so because God is going to dwell with his people, and that means Sinai, the glory, is going to follow them and go with them. And that's what we've talked about this in the past, like the tabernacle being a mobile Sinai. In fact, it's getting a little ahead of the game a little bit, but you mentioned that
that's next week
in the next week's sermon that we're going to cover. But we've talked about it a lot in B-sides already. Like that's what tabernacle is. It's mobile Sinai, and you might even go so far as to say it's mobile Eden, right? Yeah. In terms of what Sinai represents, like a return to Eden, at least in a typological, unfulfilled way, right? That's pointing towards Christ. But so in this particular chapter, God begins to give explicit instructions for pieces that are going to be inside the tabernacle. And the three you covered in the sermon were kind of like your 3 points, right? You had the ark, you had the bread and the lampstands. Yep. So maybe we could start by you just giving a little bit of a what's up with this furniture? How do we even just start the process of understanding this furniture in the tabernacle?
Yeah, you can even back it up a little bit and go, what does it mean when furniture is being made? Yeah, what are furnishings for? What is furniture for? Like, when do people talk about furniture? Well, a lot of times it's when you're moving into a house, right? Because otherwise your furniture is just there. You don't mess with it. So the fact that you're in this text, you're seeing essentially what you can describe as furniture being the Ark of the Covenant, the lampstand, and then the bread of presence. You're building furniture to furnish a dwelling, and it's really interesting. I just this morning was listening to Alistair. He's a Theophilus guy.
Alistair. What's his name? I know you're talking about Roberts.
It's not Alistair Begg. Yes, Alistair Roberts. And he pointed something out that I thought was really interesting, that the way that Exodus talks about the tabernacle is different than the way that Leviticus talks about it.
Interesting.
And it emphasizes different things. Both are true, but different things are being emphasized. So in Leviticus, it's the place of meeting because, and you think about Leviticus and what's being prescribed, it's all about how the people come near. But Exodus is the flip side of it. It's God's place, right? It's his house, and he's moving in. And the emphasis lanes more heavily on that. So he's coming in, he's moving to the neighborhood, he's bringing his furniture, he's going to dwell with his people, and he's going to arrange his house the way that he wants it.
That's helpful. I think that is because that is one of the things I was thinking about the tabernacle a little while ago, and how there's kind of three different, I don't know, paradigm or perspectives you could take on it, right?
It's tri-perspectival.
Yeah. This is a very tri-perspectival thought, Rusten thought here. Okay, so you have in the tabernacle, and what you said just reminded me of it, because I want to go study Leviticus and see if I can see the difference between how Exodus talks and Leviticus talks, with this like in mind. So one of the things that the tabernacle is a like. It is a type of Christ, right? It's pointing to Christ. Christ is the one who tabernacles among us. The other thing is that it's a model of what the new creation is, where God meets with man again, right? Which again, you could say that's, that is really encapsulated by it being, Christ, like a type of Christ also. But there's a different emphasis when you start thinking about it in terms of like it's the deposit of the new creation, right? It's something that is restoring something lost. And the other part is it's a model of you might even call this personal holiness. Okay, like we are called, the temple, right? The New Testament, when the old tabernacle goes away, not only is it because Christ has come, but it's also because we are the temple, right? And so there's all these like interesting regulations about the temple. Like you have to have, I think this comes up in Leviticus, where you have to have like guards, guards in front of the different openings, and and even like things are ordered in such a way that they're very square and straight. Nothing's really disordered. And and how it's kind of it's a little bit of and you have even the testimony in the center of the tabernacle. It's like, okay, so what is that? If you look at that as like a model of what it means to be a Christian, it's like, okay, guard your doors, right? Don't let in error and sin, right? Like, there's this orderliness to it, that we are being ordered according to God and his word. And then you have like, what is at the center of that? Well, God and his word, his testimony, and his mercy seat should be at the center of your heart and your life. Yeah. And so it's kind of like, it's kind of interesting when you think about it, like, and it makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't have thought that last part unless I had read it, in the New Testament, where it talks about how we are the temple. And so you're like, so what? I can also look at the tabernacle and kind of see these pictures that illustrate what we are supposed to be pursuing as Christians, right? So
there's all sorts of layers of understanding, and symbolism and patterns and connections. Like, or you're talking, I'm thinking about, when sacrifices are made, blood was put on the altar, right? And you talk about like you're being cleansed with a blood that makes you clean. But in the temple, it's put on the altar. It's like, well, you become the sacrifice, right? As a Christian, that you're laying your life down. This is your act of worship, Paul says.
Living sacrifice. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And there's a kind of like, even just like the sacrifice goes up, like, and there's a sense in which we, Paul talks about we are in the heavenly places, like we've ascended in Christ, right? Yeah. So there's all these things. So let's talk about the things that were in this chapter now. So, all right. I guess so. This is B-sides. You can talk about whatever is on the B-side. So, okay. So the ark. Okay. So I love what you said about the point of the furniture is it's a house, right? It's a place. It's a dwelling place. And you brought up this is the dwelling place of God. Like God is meeting with man through the tabernacle system. So let's talk about one of the things I find interesting is that the ark is mentioned first.
Yeah.
Like, what do you like? Do you have any thoughts about the order in which it's given?
There's a whole. I was just thinking about this morning in prepping for 27. There's a whole order and pattern that is pretty closely followed, leading up to the golden calf thing that's going to come in a couple chapters. When the instructions are given to Moses, it's from the inside out. And so the first thing is the ark. The ark is the most central, most important. That's clearly represented with all the gold. It's the most ornate, most precious, most beautiful, but that's the glory. So it begins with that. But that also that's placed in the Holy of Holies. It's not the holy place. It's in the very heart of, the tabernacle, right? And then it moves out with the lamp, which is not in the most holy place, but it is in the holy place. And then you have the bread of presence. So you have those three things are created first. And then after that, right, those are the parts that go in. Then you have the house that's built like to contain those things, which is the actual tabernacle, which is relatively small, about 45 feet long and 15 feet wide. But you have the insides made and then the outsides. And then the same pattern happens with the broader tabernacle area, like the outer court, where the next instructions are for the altar, right, that's going to be built. And then you have the covering around the whole thing. And it's like it's inside first. It's always inside out. But it's also from the Holy of Holies out as well, if that makes sense.
Totally.
But the inside things are always made first, and then the outside things come. So there's a progression to it.
It's a very interesting progression when you think about the I haven't gone and read the next part where they actually start making it, because this is like the instruction time, and then later they'll actually make it. I think all over again. You get the same instruction all over again as they're actually building it. Does it also come in that order then? Do you know?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah.
But there's definitely you go Ark, Holy of Holies, you have bread of presence, the lamps in the most holy place. Then you've got the construction around that. Then you have the altar, right, made, and then you have the court of the tabernacle made around that. And then the very next thing that is talked about is the priestly garments. Because now you're going back in, right? You go from the ark out to the court, and now you're going from the court back in. And it's all very intentional. Because that's the way it flows, right? That's the way it flows. So
So what is the ark? What are we like? You mentioned the the whole Indiana Jones thing. It's like this nuclear melt your face off, ancient technology, right? That's at least that's how it seems like Raiders of the Lost Ark are portraying it, right? And actually, I've heard this before. I've talked to people who actually think that the Ark was real, but that it was like they had discovered plutonium or something like that. Like people really believe that kind of stuff. So that's why
the ark was real, but it contained plutonium.
Yes, like that's more believable in our scientific age. That's why all the Philistines got tumors when they got the remember when the ark goes to the Philistines? And then like Dagon keeps falling down, and then he breaks his nose off or something like that, and then he they're like the whole town gets tumors, and so they send it away with like golden tumors on the on the cart. So anyways, because of that, I've heard this it must be radioactive or something like that, and it reminds me of like the 10 plagues and how somebody wants to find a very scientific,
to naturalize everything.
Naturalize everything. So what is the ark? I mean, we're not even familiar with the word ark, and I don't even know that the Hebrew is the same here as like ark as the like Noah's Ark is, but I think that the ark just means container. Is that what it is?
Yeah. It's basically this container, and it's all covered with gold. And then the inside of that, you're going to have, at this point, it's the testimony. Now you're going to have Aaron's staff that's added to that too, and some manna, which is also part of the testimony. But at this point, it's meant to contain the words of the covenant. And you think about where do words come from? Right? They come from people, right? They come out. And so the ark really functions like, obviously it can't contain God, right? Yeah. But it has all of the signs of this is where God's at, in a symbolic way. And it's very much like you always have to think about what's come before in the story, and the details. I just had this conversation with somebody after church on just yesterday. There's this wonderful line in the Dark Knight Rises. It's the last of the Batman trilogy with Christopher Nolan.
Okay, I've seen this.
I absolutely
Isn't that
love
with Bane?
that series.
Is Bane
That's
in that
Bane.
one?
Yes,
Okay,
Bane is in that one.
Yeah.
So in that movie, you're introduced to this figure who really kind of fills the role of Robin, although it never really officially happens. It's just like this big teaser, and I kind of keep waiting for them to do that. But anyways, there's a conversation between this guy who's kind of the Robin figure and Commissioner Gordon, and Commissioner Gordon's in the hospital. He's all, thrashed up. And this kid, who works for the police force, has been investigating, and he starts noticing all these coincidences. So he brings them to the commissioner.
Yep.
And the commissioner, just this great line, he goes, "Son, you're a detective. You're not allowed to believe in coincidences." Yeah. And so I had this conversation yesterday and shared that quote, that it's like, when you see things in Scripture that are connected, right? The first assumption shouldn't be this is a coincidence. You should lean into it and go, there's probably something there. So the entire arrangement of the tabernacle area, and we're getting ahead of ourselves in future weeks, but if you're going to enter into the area, you have to enter in through the east. You enter in, and you're headed into the western direction, right? So when you go back to Genesis 3 and you find Adam and Eve are exiled out, they're exiled out east, right? They're sent east. East is exile. And so the opening is on the east so that you can move from east to west. It's a movement back into the garden. And the ark, specifically the cherubim that are on top of the ark, that are facing each other, that have their wings, right? They're in essence like guarding it, are very much like the cherubim with the flaming swords in Genesis 3, right? And so you can't go back east. You need to go back east, but you can't go back east because it's guarded, right?
Exactly.
And that's what the ark is. The ark is like, it's like Eden, and it's guarded, and you can't go in, and you have to stay out, but you have to go in, right? Because that's where the testimony is, and that's where atonement is made. So the ark is very much it's Eden, not in the sense that it's literally the earth of Eden, but it is to God's people what Eden is to Adam and Eve. It's the place that God dwells, that they can no longer go into because of sin. And it's guarded now to keep you out, and yet there's a door.
Yes, and yet there's a door, and that's a I remember kind of personally noticing this, and I think you're totally right. We cannot there's no such thing as coincidences, right? Yeah. Like, you're not allowed to believe in coincidences, and I think that there's that underneath that is the belief that what you might call verbal plenary inspiration. Like, we actually do not believe the Holy Spirit wastes his breath, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
everything is intentional. And this is where if you're talking about like hermeneutics and exegetical, like where you find yourself in certain camps, I really do appreciate the side of things that would oftentimes be given the term exegetical maximalism, right? So you're like, you want to take it all in and not assume things are just like, oh, that's just an arbitrary detail. No, like there's a proverb that talks about how, the glory of the Lord is to conceal a thing, right? And the glory of kings is to discover it or dig it up, whatever, right? So there's a kind of like, okay, so we need to be students of the word and trust that God has put things in here that we will be able to kind of connect and see. And I think that's how it appears the New Testament authors read the Old Testament. Like they saw things that a lot of, scholarly hermeneutic guys would claim that they're breaking rules of hermeneutics. But you know what I mean?
Whose rules?
Whose rules? Exactly. It's like, well, wouldn't you rather learn hermeneutics from, Paul or Peter than whoever's teaching at so-and-so seminary? Like, you know what I mean? So and they seem to lean into details. And that doesn't mean we're like we're allegorizing stuff. Like, no, there's actually a redemptive historical connection between these things. One of the things that you mentioned already was like, right now it's just the tablets in the ark, and then later you're going to add manna and Aaron's staff. And I've often thought about that, like, what is up with those three elements? And I was reading my Bible once in John where Jesus says he's the way, the truth, and the life. Right. And I'm like, I wonder if there's a connection there. Like there's this, it's one of the few things where, there's a three-partite, that Jesus refers to himself as this, and this, right? And this is like one of the few things in the Old Testament that contains three things, right? In terms of it's what it holds. And, they kind of correspond pretty well, like life and manna, truth and the testimony, and then the way. This is where I get a little smudgy, like maybe that's Aaron's staff, like that leads the way, kind of thing. And so there's a kind of like, the ark is, everything about the ark is pointing towards Christ. Like you could say that without making that direct correlation between those words. And one thing you said earlier that I think is really, I've thought about as well, is like the fact that the door, all the doors open east. Like you mentioned this. And the crazy thing is that when you get later to Numbers, where the nation is being given specific assignments for where they camp around the tent.
Right. 3 tribes on each of the 4 sides.
Yes. And on the side facing facing the door of the tabernacle is Moses, the sons of Aaron, and Judah. So you have prophet, priest, and king that camp right in the front of the door. And I always thought, like, okay, so also the sun rises in the east, so you have this like light shining. You have the shadow of prophet, priest, and king cast upon the tabernacle, which is itself a shadow of Christ.
When you were talking about the contents of the ark, I think you also have a prophet, priest, and king presence in the ark. The bread being priestly. I think you could argue that the words are the prophet, and then the staff is a staff of authority. It's a ruling staff.
Yes.
So you've got prophet, priest, king right there too. Yeah, but then they're also lined up at the east.
Yes, it's very
because and if you think about it, they're the ones that would lead the people in, right? That's what they're supposed to do.
Yes, that's each one of them is given a very specific task of leading God's people in. Like the prophet brings the word and the correction. The priest, does the mediatorial work, right? The sacrificial rites of blood being shed for sin, and like bringing the people to God. And then the king rules the people with his wisdom. And all these things are pointing to Christ, who is prophet, priest, and king. So anyways, it's like
go ahead.
I don't know what I was gonna say.
It's really incredible, and it's one of the things that's been I think you and I talked about this earlier, a little I don't know if frustrating is the right word, but when you're preparing, because of the way that we view the scriptures and the way that we understand what the church is and what our job is as preachers, it's like, this is the next chapter, this is what you're preaching, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
when you are trying to study for that and you're looking for resources, it's just like, there's not a whole lot of resources. There's some weird stuff out there, but even the commentaries that have been really helpful up to this point in Exodus, they just get a little less helpful. And I started searching around, like, other people have preached through these chapters, right? And it's like, it's kind of hard to find good resources, because I think that for whatever reason, we hit this section of scripture and you kind of just, you check out, and maybe you get bored with the details, or, like I said yesterday, it's like, well, we're not building a tabernacle, so why do we need to know about the rings and the clasps and the bases? It's like, we're not putting it up. Yeah. But it's more than that, because the tabernacle is, in a very real way, it is a witness. It is a testimony. Yes. God is mapping out for his people how they relate to him and who he is. It reveals the problem of sin. It reveals the solution to sin. You have, the pattern of Sinai with the top, the middle, and the bottom, and how it is that we approach God, what it means for him to dwell with us. And like, we're not building a tabernacle, but all of that is incredibly important, and all that is consistent throughout all of scripture, so it is important.
Yeah. There's a way people look at the tabernacle stuff, and even like Leviticus in particular, as having almost like they think of it like as bondage, and I think that view goes too far in having a negative connotation to this, because what the tabernacle does is it tells us how necessary Christ is. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it teaches us what Christ, like, we would not understand we would not understand Christ's coming if it wasn't for the tabernacle and the law. Right. Right. And so there's a kind of like, because otherwise, why don't you, like, it's in God's wisdom, he has all this history before Christ comes. And it's all to make Christ apparent when he does come. And so there's a kind of like, oh, this is, it's actually not bondage. It's just unfulfilled. It's not complete, but everything about it points us to Christ. And because of that, Christians can go look at Leviticus and go look at the tabernacle stuff and not be like, oh man, this is just rough. Like, we go, no, this is all pointing to Christ.
For sure. Yeah. There's one thing I think I pointed out in chapter 25, where you have the tabernacles being made, you got the furniture being made, you're expecting someone to move in. I even like painted this idea of like the lampstand with the light and the bread, and it's like,
you should talk more about that, because that was one of the best parts.
Yeah. Well, I was taking a little bit of license with the bread's not in the Holy of Holies. So it's like, and the light isn't in the Holy of Holies. So, but you still have this dwelling place where you have a light on with the lampstands, and you've got bread on the table, and then you have the mercy seat that's not occupied by anybody. And it just, it's a warm house with a light on that's expecting a guest, Yes. And there's a sense of like prophetic expectation with that. Like, God's dwelling with us, and there's a lamp and there's a bread, and the Ark of the Covenant looks like a throne that you might sit on and rule from, and it contains the words that would be, declared as a king, but the king's not there, right? Yes. And it's like, there's one sense in which it's inviting like you to come in, but you can't go in, but it's like it's expecting somebody. And when the thing I was just looking at this morning, when Solomon builds the temple, right? And it's like 10 times what the tabernacle is. There's a development in which the king's quarters are inside now, inside that area. And it's like, okay, so in the tabernacle, it really looks like it's waiting for someone to come in. In the temple, Now you've got a king that's moved in, but not into the tabernacle, just into the, into the vicinity, into the temple. And okay, the third step is going to be the king is going to come to his temple, right? He's actually going to come to his temple. And there's a really, this is next week, but I'm just going to say it. There's a point in Exodus 26 where it talks about the ark being brought into the temple. And it's it's just like, what that is. If you're a Christian, like the son is coming to his temple, and and he's going to be rejected, but he is the temple, but he's coming to the temple, and all of that is laid, the groundwork for all that is laid here in the IKEA instructions of the tabernacle in Exodus 25.
Yeah, there's so many different elements here that point to, I wonder if they point in different ways to different parts of Jesus's ministry. Mm-hmm. Like, you have obviously like the blood and the sacrifice, speaking about his priesthood, but you also have like, with the glory cloud coming down, or as you kind of hinted at, this idea of like it's waiting for the king. This heavenly place is waiting. This heavenly place on earth is waiting for the king. Well, there's a sense in which the king shows up, to the copy and gets rejected, right? And that's where the blood is shed. But then he goes to the not copy in his ascension, where now he sits. And so there's a kind of like, I think that those things are related. There is it's almost like the tabernacle's waiting for the second Adam to come back to Eden and establish his rule and reign, sit enthroned upon the cherubim rather than kicked out by the cherubim.
Yep. Yeah.
And that happens. It happens in history.
Yeah.
When Jesus ascends. So it's really interesting. It's all there. It's right there.
Well, and then there's something, when you, again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but when you have the dimensions for the actual Holy of Holies, which we get in the next chapter, like it is a perfect cube. God, the intensity of God's dwelling is a perfect cube, and that is going to show up again later in Revelation, where it's like this great city. What is it? It's a perfect cube, but it's a city. Now the cube is God and his people.
Yes.
Right? Before it's God and you can't come in. Now it's God and his people are in the cube, and no one else can come in.
Yeah, I know.
So it's like you have all of history mapped out in the
tabernacle.
Yeah, you do. You have this like roadmap. Not to get all like eschatologically awkward and weird, but it's there. It's absolutely there.
Which is I think one of the reasons why when Asaph is looking at the world around him and thinking, I envy the wicked. They don't have any problems in life. Yeah. He then goes to the sanctuary, and he can, through the sanctuary itself and the ministry of the sanctuary, and that's the word and all the liturgy stuff and all the design as well, he can discern the end of the wicked. Right? There's like he could see it. He could see the pattern of history. There's a king coming who's going to rule, and the wicked can't stand before him. So, anyways, boy, we can nerd out on the tabernacle.
We're just getting started.
I know, we're just getting warmed up. This is chapter 1 on the tabernacle. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll continue the tabernacle talk on the next episode. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to Sermon B-Sides. Until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. See ya.
See ya.